I discovered my father was having an affair. A betrayer must face a punishment that fits the crime. My name is Nathan Reed, and the moment I saw that photograph, I knew something was wrong. Trust me, you'll regret skipping this story. So before you sit back and listen, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to Ethan's Way. Now get in the mood to listen to this story because it might be the ultimate sweet revenge. It started on a rainy Tuesday. I was in my father's study helping him organize digital files from his latest business trip. He'd spilled coffee on his laptop and I offered to help transfer everything to a new device. It was routine boring, even until a folder labeled MISC 2222 caught my eye. Inside, a series of photographs loaded slowly. Most were dull receipts, restaurant menus, plane tickets. But then I saw it. A selfie dated just a month ago. My father smiling in a booth at a dimly lit Italian restaurant. Across from him, a woman, early 40s hair and soft waves, red lipstick. She leaned in close, her cheek nearly touching his. The smile on his face wasn't the one he wore with my mom. It was unguarded, possessive, like a man who had claimed something. That smile didn't belong. I stared at the screen unmoving. In the background, you could see a bottle of red wine. My father rarely drank. That's what he always told my mom. Said it gave him migraines. But in this picture, he looked comfortable, practiced. I minimized the window and sat back in the creaky leather chair. My heart wasn't racing, it was sinking. At first I tried to rationalize it. Maybe she was a client, a business partner, but that smile, that proximity, there were no documents, no laptops, no signs of work, just intimacy. I didn't say anything to him that night, just packed up his files, transferred them cleanly to the new system, and drove home in silence. The windshield wipers squeaked rhythmically, but my thoughts were static. This couldn't be real. Not him, not my father. Growing up, I used to think he was bulletproof. He wasn't just my dad, he was the dad. The one who taught me to tie my shoes, fix my bike chain at midnight, before a big school race showed up to every one of my short film screenings, even when they were garbage. I once caught him crying while watching one of my early documentaries about how fragile love is. He hugged me afterward and said, "Don't ever be the kind of man who forgets what promises mean." And now this. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I stared at my reflection, wondering if I was overreacting. Maybe it was innocent, a joke, a dare. Maybe he was helping someone through a tough time. But deep down I knew. That smile doesn't lie, so I did what I know best. I started gathering footage. I'm a filmmaker. I notice details. I document emotion. It's second nature to me to record things, analyze them, cut them together to tell a story. This time, the story was personal. I started small, just watched his patterns. My father's habits used to be clockwork. But lately, there were discrepancies. He left early some mornings, came back late on Wednesdays, blaming client meetings that somehow didn't match up with his calendar. He'd started locking his phone. My mother joked about it once at dinner, saying, "Who's he hiding from?" Everyone laughed, except him. His face froze for a fraction of a second before smiling again. It was like seeing a crack form on polished glass. I remembered the photo, that red lipstick, that lean-in closeness. So I started checking his other devices passively, never breaking into anything, just observing, just waiting. And then something strange happened. I found more photos, not all on his computer. Some were saved in an old email draft folder, as if he'd written to this woman but never sent the messages. One subject line read, "Last night was everything I needed. I'm counting the days." I felt like I was suffocating, not because I didn't believe it, but because part of me did. This wasn't a one-time mistake. This was a pattern, a secret life, and the man I looked up to had constructed it so carefully, so deliberately, that no one else saw the fault lines. No one but me. I remember sitting on my apartment floor with my laptop in front of me, the screen still glowing with those words. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just whispered to myself, "You lied to all of us." I didn't know what I would do yet, but one thing was certain. If he could build a secret life, I could build a truth he'd never escape. And this time, the editing table would be mine. The next time I saw him, I tried to act normal. We were in the backyard grilling steaks the way we always did when the weather turned nice. He handed me a beer, same brand we always drank together, and said, "Proud of you, son. That documentary you made about the old mechanic, beautiful work." I nodded, said thanks, smiled. But in my mind, I saw the draft email again, counting the days, and I couldn't stop seeing her face. That woman Lena, I would later learn, with that perfect smile and the way she touched his arm like she'd done it 100 times before. I started looking for more inconsistencies, moments when his stories didn't quite line up, like how he said he was visiting a sick colleague in the hospital on a Tuesday, but Mom said he'd been grumbling about a business trip that day, or the receipt I found for a necklace when it wasn't Mom who wore jewelry anymore. I didn't confront him, not yet. Instead, I waited for an opportunity. And it came faster than I expected. His old laptop, the one I thought he'd given up on, was still in his closet. Cracked screen, busted trackpad. But I know how to breathe life back into tech. It's what I do when I edit film, find broken things, and make them whole again. So I powered it up, connected it to an external monitor, and started scanning. Most of it was trash. Old documents, work, files, tax records. But then I found a folder buried deep inside the hidden cache. It was called L, just a single letter. Inside were screenshots of chats, images, notes written in Word, letters never sent. I clicked through each one, hitting harder than the last. When I'm with you, I remember what it feels like to be seen. She stopped looking at me like that years ago. I want to leave, but I don't know how without breaking everything. Every line twisted something inside me. My father wasn't just cheating. He was emotionally dismantling my mother in the background, blaming her, rewriting their history, excusing his selfishness as longing. And Lena, she encouraged it. There were replies, messages saved in notepad files, intimate, flirtatious, planning vacations, fantasizing about a future together. I wanted to throw the laptop across the room, but I didn't, because rage wouldn't help me, not yet. Instead, I copied everything. I backed it up twice, encrypted folders, password-protected drives. I didn't know what I'd do with it, but I knew I needed it. Evidence, truth. I needed to build my case the way I'd build a documentary structure, a motion climax. I wasn't going to expose him just to hurt him. No, I was going to reveal him. That night, I sat in my apartment staring at all the content I had, images, messages, inconsistencies, and I realized something disturbing. I had more proof of his double life than I had of his love for us. When did that shift happen? When did the man who once read bedtime stories and held my mother's hand during thunderstorms become this cold strategist of lies? The worst part, he was good at it, careful, private. It made me question every memory. Had it all been a performance, or was he just two people all along? The next weekend, I offered to help him update his iPhone. He handed it to me without hesitation. Trust is a strange thing. We'd always trusted each other. I had never snooped before. Never had reason to, but now I navigated through apps while we chatted about sports and local news. That's when I saw the second email account, one he hadn't synced before. I opened it while he fetched drinks. There were only a handful of messages, but they were recent. To Lena? Can't wait for Thursday. Same place, room 206. I'll bring wine. Room 206. The number imprinted itself in my mind. I saved the screenshot and locked the phone before he came back. I smiled, took a sip of my drink, asked about his golf game, and all the while I was planning. Thursday, room 206. That was my next step. I didn't sleep the night before. I kept asking myself, was I doing the right thing? Was it revenge, justice, curiosity? All I knew was that if I let it go, it would rot inside me. I'd carry the silence the way my mother had carried his betrayal, silently, with a soft smile and tired eyes. No, I wasn't going to let this fester. So on Thursday evening, I drove across town. Not to confront him, not yet, but to watch. The motel was cheap, old red brick, neon sign blinking like a dying heartbeat. I parked far enough to not be seen, pulled my camera from the passenger seat and zoomed in. I waited. Then he arrived, car door shut. He straightened his shirt, checked his hair in the mirror. A few minutes later, she appeared. Lena. Same woman from the photo. She was dressed casually like she belonged there. They embraced. Briefly, but not the way friends do. He touched her face, kissed her, and then they disappeared into room 206. Click. I captured the moment, not out of spite, out of certainty. Now I knew what I had to do. I sat in the car for almost an hour after they went inside. The footage was there. The truth was no longer a theory, it was a reality burned into my memory card. But sitting with it, watching my father become someone I didn't recognize, that was a different kind of pain. I didn't go home right away. I drove aimlessly through the city windows down, letting the cold night air bite into my skin like it could somehow wake me from all of it. When I got back to my apartment, I downloaded the photos, logged, and time-stamped everything. The camera had caught the license plate, the room number, their embrace. I even had the motel's sign in the background. It was the kind of shot a documentary filmmaker would be proud of, clean framing, undeniable story. But this wasn't film school. This was my life, and I was no longer just a son. I was the editor of the truth. The next morning, I called my uncle, my dad's younger brother. We weren't particularly close, but he was sharp, well-informed. I needed perspective, or maybe I needed someone to tell me I was wrong. But when I brought up the motel, the affair, he didn't sound surprised. There was silence first, then he said, "So, you finally found out." I froze. "You knew," he sighed. "It's been going on for years, Nate. I told him to stop, told him he was playing with fire. I couldn't believe it. How could you let it happen?" "What do you want me to do? He's my brother. Your mom's not clueless either, you know. She chose to look the other way." My skin prickled. Those words, "chose to look the other way," felt like acid in my ears. "No one chooses to be humiliated," I said, low and bitter. "She's stronger than you think. She stayed for the family, for you kids." Maybe she thought protecting the image was more important than blowing it all up. He wasn't defending him, but he wasn't condemning him either. That conversation ended with me hanging up no goodbye. I thought of my mother, the quiet dignity, the way she always brushed off questions about Dad's late nights, how she smiled even when she looked like she hadn't slept in days. She had known. She just didn't want us to. Suddenly, I wasn't just holding proof of my father's betrayal. I was holding proof of my mother's silent suffering, and that made me feel worse than anything else. But it also gave me clarity. This wasn't just about revenge. It was about justice for her, and maybe a little bit for me too. So I took the next step. I compiled the files into a new project timeline. The working title, "The Man Who Lives Two Lives." It was a simple concept. I used voiceover recordings from old family footage, my father giving advice, telling me about trust, honor, commitment, layered over images of him entering the motel, laughing in messages, caressing Lena's hand. The juxtaposition was brutal. His words against his actions. The father I thought I knew layered over the man I had uncovered. It wasn't polished yet, but it was powerful. Still, I hesitated to show it, because once I did, everything would change. I had the power now, but using it meant setting off a bomb I could never take back. So I tested the waters. I visited my mom that weekend, just us two. We baked banana bread like we used to when I was a kid, talked about silly things, her neighbor's dog, my cousin's engagement. Then I asked softly, "Do you ever feel like Dad isn't really around anymore?" She looked at me, long and hard, then turned off the oven. "I know," she said. "That's all." I didn't press. I didn't cry. We just stood in that kitchen, the smell of overripe bananas, lingering with a truth that didn't need to be said out loud anymore. I left that day more determined than ever, because she deserved better, because I deserved better, because he didn't deserve to keep getting away with it. Meeting her wasn't something I rushed into. I thought about it for days, whether it was even necessary. Whether it was just my need for control, or curiosity, or some twisted part of me needing to look this woman in the eye. The one who smiled beside my father like she had a right to him. The one who had willingly or not helped him unravel everything I believed about love, loyalty, and family. But eventually I knew I had to do it. It wasn't enough to catch him. I needed to know what she knew, what she believed, and whether she was just a pawn in his lie or a co-architect of it. So I created a new identity, not a lie exactly, more like a role, something I could wear for a few hours. Jason Carr, a graduate student producing a short-form documentary about modern romantic dynamics. I used a secondary email, one I'd kept from old freelance projects, and I made contact through a regional videography group I found online, one I knew she was active in thanks to her tagged photos on social media. She responded the next day, said she was intrigued, said she'd love to contribute. People don't talk about the gray areas of love enough. We scheduled to meet on a Saturday afternoon in a quiet, tucked-away cafe downtown. Neutral territory, well-lit, casual, safe. I arrived early, sat facing the entrance, and kept my gear, low-profile audio recorder and my jacket pocket phone camera off, but angled to grab a glimpse if needed. I wore a navy hoodie pulled low with a cap and thin glasses, just enough to soften the familiarity of my features. I didn't think she knew what I looked like, but I wasn't taking chances. When she walked in, I knew it was her instantly. Lena, the same woman from the photo on my father's laptop, the same one from the motel parking lot, the one he kissed with the kind of ease you can't fake. She had her hair loose, makeup subtle but precise, and wore a soft gray coat, cinched at the waist. She ordered an iced chai, smiled at the barista, then scanned the room until our eyes met. I waved her over. "Jason?" she asked, smiling. I nodded. "Thanks for meeting me." She took the seat across from me, setting her phone face down on the table. So she said, leaning forward, "What exactly are you looking for?" I gave her the prepped speech that I was working on a student project interviewing people from various walks of life about how love and relationships were evolving in the 21st century, how long-term relationships, open dynamics, infidelity, even emotional attachments were shifting. She lit up. "Oh, that's so needed. No one talks about the gray areas. It's always black and white love or betrayal, loyal or cheating. But life's not like that." I nodded, slowly, hitting record. "Have you ever been in a situation like that yourself?" She hesitated just for a beat, then smiled, eyes gleaming with something I couldn't quite name. "I am actually." She said it like a confession and a badge of honor. "Would you be comfortable sharing?" I asked. She took a sip of her drink, exhaled, and leaned back. "There's someone very important to me. He's married, has been for a long time, but it's not a real marriage anymore. Not in the emotional sense. They haven't connected in years. It's more like habit, obligation." I kept my expression neutral. My stomach twisted. "And you believe he still loves you?" I asked, keeping my tone soft. "I know he does," she said, her voice clear, assured. "With me, he's himself. Not the version of him that's been worn down by routine or the expectations of a wife who stopped seeing him years ago. With me, he breathes again." I stared at her. "With me, he breathes again." She said it like she was doing him a favor, like she was a gift. "Do you think the wife suspects?" She shrugged. "Maybe, but she looks the other way. Some people prefer silence over truth. Some marriages are built on performance." My jaw tensed. I forced myself not to react. "And you don't feel guilty?" Another shrug. At first, sure. But then I realized I'm not the reason their marriage is broken. I didn't cause the distance. I just stepped into the space that was already there. I asked more questions, let her talk, and talk she did. She spoke about how they'd met at a film screening, how he complimented her editing style, how they'd connected over their shared love of independent cinema, how conversations turned into dinners, how the emotional intimacy came before the physical. She said he told her he'd never felt more understood, that she made him feel young again, that she made him feel real. I watched her as she said these things, not out of spite but fascination. Her confidence, her clarity, she wasn't ashamed, not even a little. In fact, she saw herself as the honest one, the one who embraced the truth even if it was messy. And my father. He was the victim in her eyes, a man trapped by duty, pulled into color by love. She knew he had kids, she even mentioned them. They're grown now. They don't really need him the same way. I nearly choked. I wanted to scream. We don't need him. No, we needed him honest. We needed him whole. We needed him to be the man we believed in. Instead, he'd split himself in half, and one of those halves had brought this woman into our world. I ended the interview after an hour. She smiled, gave me her number, said I could follow up if I needed more. Then she left light on her feet, oblivious to who I really was. I sat in that cafe for 10 minutes after she walked out, just breathing, just staring, because now I knew. She wasn't just part of the affair. She was convinced it was love. When I got home, I transferred the audio files, clean and clear, her voice smooth and articulate, talking about emotional connections and abandoned marriages. I paired it with quiet footage, old home videos of my mom stirring soup, folding laundry, sitting on the porch alone, while Dad typed emails late into the night. I edited a short sequence, black and white, her voice over my mother's silence. The contrast made me sick, but it also made me certain. This wasn't just about cheating anymore. This was about rewriting a story that had been stolen from us, a story I was going to take back frame by frame. The silence wasn't just coming from my father anymore. It was coming from everyone around him, around us, like a thick fog no one wanted to clear. The next few days after my meeting with Lena, I felt like I was walking through a world where the truth had weight, but no one wanted to carry it. I looked at everyone differently, especially the ones who were close to my father. His friends, his siblings, his golf buddies, even my older brother Mark. I kept asking myself for who else knows, because if Lena spoke so freely, so casually, then maybe this wasn't a secret at all. Maybe it was just a truth people chose not to touch like a scab they didn't want to rip open. I started with Mark. He was older by 4 years. Always Dad's favorite, or at least that's how it felt growing up. The two of them were practically twins in personality. Confident, charming, cool under pressure. But Mark had softened over the years. Marriage and 2 toddlers had changed him, grounded him. We met for drinks at a sports bar we used to frequent in our 20s. It was loud, full of Friday energy, but the conversation I wanted to have couldn't wait. "So how's Dad been lately?" I asked casually, sipping from my glass. Mark leaned back. "The usual, complains about the HOA. Says Mom overwaters the lawn, still golfing every other Thursday." He smirked, still using that as an excuse to do whatever the hell he wants. "Yeah." I paused, then looked him straight in the eyes. "Do you know about her?" His expression didn't shift for a full second, then ever so slightly a flicker, not surprise, not confusion, but recognition. He looked down into his beer. "You mean, Lena?" There it was. I exhaled long and heavy. "So you knew." Mark didn't look proud, but he didn't look ashamed either. "I found out 2 years ago," he said quietly. "Saw them together after a charity dinner. At first I thought it was someone from work. Then I saw him kiss her before they left. I stared at him. And you didn't tell Mom." He looked at me like I was naive. "Nate, she knows." That made me sit back. "She knows." He nodded. "She may not know the details, but she knows enough." I asked her once. She just said, "Your father has a complicated sense of loyalty." I scoffed. "A complicated sense of loyalty? Is that what we're calling betrayal?" Now, Mark leaned forward. "Look, I'm not defending him. I think it's disgusting. But Mom's not a fool. She's chosen to stay. For the house. For the history. Maybe for us." "No," I said, voice low. "Not for us. We're grown. She's staying because he built a world where leaving would cost her everything." Mark didn't respond, because deep down he knew I was right. The next person I talked to was Uncle Darren, my dad's younger brother. A quieter man, someone who'd always stayed on the periphery of family drama. He was single, lived alone, worked in accounting. I called and asked to meet him in person. We sat in his small apartment surrounded by framed jazz records and half-read history books. "I need to ask you something," I said without any build-up, "and I want the truth." He nodded. "Did you know Dad's having an affair?" Darren didn't flinch. "I did." "How long?" He sighed, rubbed his forehead. "I don't know. 5, 6 years, maybe longer." I felt a pulse in my temple. "And you said nothing." What was I supposed to say, Nathan? He's not the kind of man who takes advice. You confront him, he laughs it off. You press, he shuts down. "And your mom, she never brought it up, not once." I figured it was their business. I shook my head, furious. "You all watched him erode our family from the inside and said nothing. You let her carry the weight of pretending. You let us grow up thinking he was someone he wasn't." Darren looked sad. "I didn't think it was my place." That's the problem, I snapped. No one thought it was their place. So he kept doing it, because no one ever stopped him. I left before I said something worse. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept turning over their faces in my mind. Mark, Darren, Lena, all of them orbiting around my father's secret like planets around a sun. Not daring to get too close, not daring to speak. And in the center of all of it was my mother. I visited her the next day. She was out in the garden pulling weeds with her sleeves rolled up and her hair tied back. She looked peaceful until she looked up and saw my face. "You found something," she said simply. I sat down on the patio chair beside her. I met her. She didn't ask who. I recorded her. She thinks she's saving him, thinks she's rescuing him from a marriage that's grown cold. Mom smiled softly. "Of course she does. She said you don't see him anymore, that you just hold on for appearances." Mom nodded. She's not entirely wrong. I flinched. "Why didn't you ever say anything?" She leaned back, arms resting on her knees. "Because it wouldn't have changed anything. Your father doesn't admit guilt. He rewrites it. If I had accused him, he would have said I was imagining things, that I was bitter. And the people around us, they would have nodded but stayed silent, just like they always have. Her voice wasn't angry. It was tired. "You deserved better," I whispered. "So did he," she said. That confused me. "I married a man I thought would grow with me," she continued. "Instead, he grew around me, found his own shadows to hide in. But I chose this life, Nate. I chose to stay. That doesn't make me weak. I wanted to believe that. But I also couldn't let it end this way. Maybe he doesn't deserve to be exposed for cheating," I said, my voice calm. "But he deserves to see what it looks like from the outside. The lies, the rewrites, the damage." She looked at me with something like sadness and something like hope. "Then make it beautiful," she said. "If you're going to do it, don't make it ugly. Make it honest." I called it The Man Who Lives Two Lives. The edit took me a full week. I barely slept, barely ate. I was possessed not by rage, but by precision. Every clip had to be exact. Every second had to hold weight. I didn't want this to feel like an ambush. I wanted it to feel like a mirror. Because that's what it really was, wasn't it? I wasn't out to destroy my father. I was out to reveal him, to hold up everything he tried to bury and say, "Look, this is you. This is who you've become." The footage opened with old home videos. Dad in the backyard grilling burgers, carrying me on his shoulders, laughing beside my mother as they painted the nursery. Then came the voiceovers. His voice deep, confident from interviews I'd recorded years ago for a family project. I'd asked him once, "What does love mean to you?" He had answered, "It means showing up. Not just once, not just when it's convenient, but every day, in the quiet ways, in the small things." I layered that line over the first cut to the motel parking lot, him exiting the car, glancing around, straightening his collar, then a slow dissolve to Lena's voice from our recorded conversation. "Some marriages are built on performance," he says with me, he breathes. Over that, a slow shot of my mother wiping down the kitchen counter, alone, silent. The timeline of betrayal was stitched together, screenshots of emails, texts, voice memos from Lena, photos of them together in the background of conferences and business trips, footage of my father giving speeches at church functions about integrity and faithfulness, contrasted with time-stamped records of his motel visits. And over all of it, I added a subtle soundtrack, low piano, nothing dramatic, just haunting. There were no jump cuts, no anger in the pacing, no flashing headlines or pointing fingers, just truth curated, undeniable, patient. 10 minutes and 43 seconds. That was the final runtime. I watched it 7 times in a row when it was done. Each time I felt something different, sadness, fury, grief, vindication. But the one thing I didn't feel was guilt. This wasn't revenge. This was testimony. I saved 3 versions, one on a flash drive, one on a secure cloud account, and one embedded privately on a video sharing platform with password protection. Then I waited for the right moment. That moment came quicker than expected, my parents' 30th wedding anniversary. They were hosting a small gathering at a cozy restaurant they used to frequent when we were kids. Close family, a few of Dad's colleagues, some neighbors, cake speeches, champagne. Mark pulled me aside beforehand. "You're not going to do anything crazy, right? I'm just going to be honest," I said. He didn't argue. The private dining room had soft golden lighting and white tablecloths. The whole thing felt like a performance, a curated moment of nostalgia. My father made a toast, of course, said things like 30 years with the most patient woman I know, and love is a decision you make every day. I almost laughed. Instead, I stood and tapped my glass. "Actually," I said, "I made something for today." The room hushed. Everyone looked at me, then at the waiter rolling in the projector cart I'd asked for. My dad looked curious. My mom looked still. No one expected what came next. The screen flickered to life, and the film began. No introductions, no warning, just image after image, him with her, her words, his lies, his voice saying one thing while the screen showed another. At first there was silence, then murmurs, then gasps. I didn't watch the screen. I watched him. His face shifted gradually, confusion, then tension, then dread. He didn't speak, didn't interrupt, just stared stone still. When it ended, I stood in the silence. "This is the man I grew up admiring," I said, voice even. "This is the man who told me never to break a promise. I think it's only fair we all get to see the whole picture." Then I turned off the projector. No one clapped, no one moved. My father rose slowly from his chair, his mouth slightly open as if searching for the right performance to wear next. But there was nothing left to say. Every lie had already been spoken and now undone. He didn't look at my mother, didn't look at me. He just walked out. The door swung behind him with the softest click. After a few seconds, someone cleared their throat. Mark stood, mumbled something about needing air, and left too. But my mother, she stayed seated, and for the first time in years she looked free. No one dared speak to her. She didn't cry. She just looked at me and nodded. Later that night she texted me 3 words, "Thank you, Nathan." I stared at that message for a long time, because no matter how painful that evening was, no matter how fractured everything had become, I had done what she hadn't been allowed to. I had spoken the truth. Fallout is never immediate. It creeps in slowly like smoke after a fire long after the flames have gone out when you think the danger has passed, but you're still coughing. That's how it felt after the anniversary dinner. The next morning, my phone buzzed, non-stop texts from cousins who had been there, voicemails from people I hadn't spoken to in years, and a curt message from my father. "We need to talk." I didn't answer. He followed it up with another. "You've humiliated me in front of everyone. I hope you're proud. No apology, no denial, just blame." And that told me everything. He wasn't sorry for what he'd done. He was sorry I had shown it. Mark called that evening. I let it go to voicemail. He tried again the next day, then showed up at my apartment unannounced. "Can we talk?" he said, standing in my doorway. I let him in. He paced for a while, hands in his pockets, visibly uncomfortable. "You really burned the house down, huh?" he finally muttered. "No," I said. "Dad did. I just turned the lights on." He stopped pacing. "You know he's not talking to Mom now. He moved into a hotel. He made that choice." Mark exhaled sharply. "You don't get it, Nate. You destroyed him. His reputation, his friendships gone. Half the people in that room were business partners. They're distancing themselves, so now we're worried about his network. I'm saying maybe you could have handled it differently." I stared at him. My voice was calm but steel-edged. "And what would have been the better way, Mark? Let it rot. Keep letting Mom eat her heart out in silence while he plays house with another woman across town." Mark didn't answer. "I didn't do this out of spite," I continued. "I did it because no one else would. You knew. Darren knew. Half the family probably knew, and no one said anything. Everyone protected him." There was a long pause. He sat on the edge of my couch, staring at the floor. "Dad always made it clear, don't air dirty laundry. Keep things private. That was the rule." "Exactly," I said, "and look what that rule built." Another silence. Then Mark said something that stunned me. "I envy you." I blinked. I stayed quiet because I couldn't imagine blowing it all up. "But you did. You faced it head on. I wish I had that in me." He left not long after, and for the first time in years I saw Mark as more than my father's shadow. He was another person wounded by the lie, too afraid to speak, but finally honest enough to admit it. The next day, my father showed up at my apartment. I didn't even hear him knock. I opened the door to grab a delivery and found him standing there. He looked older, like the guilt had finally begun to weigh him down. "Nathan," he said. I didn't answer. "Can I come in?" "No." He nodded slowly. "Fair." He looked around as if expecting the neighbors to be listening. "You think I'm a monster," he said. "I think you're a coward," I replied. That hit him harder than I expected. He flinched. "I loved her," he said. "You had a wife." "She stopped loving me." "No," I cut him off, voice sharp. "She stopped sacrificing herself for your ego. That's not the same." He looked away. "I didn't mean to hurt anyone," he said. I laughed bitterly. "Is that what Lena told you? That you're the victim in this? I was just unhappy. And instead of working on it or walking away, you split your life in two and pretended you could live both. I made mistakes." "No," I said, voice low. "You made decisions. Over and over again." He swallowed hard. "I've lost everything." "No," I corrected him again. "You gave it up, bit by bit, moment by moment. You sacrificed love, trust, and dignity for what? To feel young again, to breathe." He didn't speak. I closed the door, not out of cruelty, but because that conversation had already ended long before it began. Mom moved into a small apartment across town within 2 weeks. I helped her pack. She was calm, efficient. She didn't break down once. She kept the wedding photo, though. When I asked why, she said, "It's not a reminder of the betrayal. It's a reminder that I once believed in something beautiful, and that belief made me strong even if he didn't deserve it." There was no bitterness in her voice, just clarity. I stayed the night after helping her settle in. The place was modest, white walls, cozy light, the scent of lavender in every room. Before bed, she handed me a mug of tea and said, "What you did. It cost a lot." "I know, but it was necessary. I didn't want to hurt you." She smiled. "You didn't hurt me. You honored me. There's a difference." The community didn't know what to do with us. Some people rallied around my mom, quietly bringing her groceries, inviting her to garden groups, leaving notes at her door. Others avoided her altogether, as if divorce was contagious. As for my father, he resigned from his church board position, citing personal reasons. Lena vanished from social media. The last I heard, he was renting a short-term condo and working remote most days. We hadn't spoken since that day on my doorstep. He never apologized, but I didn't need one anymore. Because this wasn't about reconciliation, it was about reckoning. And everyone had seen what needed to be seen. The quiet after the storm is deceptive. People think once the truth comes out, things settle, that justice brings peace. But in reality, it just rearranges everything. Old relationships become strained. Silences stretch longer. And the people you once thought you knew become shadows you keep avoiding in supermarket aisles and at mutual events. I didn't expect everything to heal overnight, but I also didn't expect how lonely the aftermath would feel. The documentary The Man Who Lives Two Lives was still private. Only a handful of people had seen it that night at the anniversary dinner. But I kept it online, password protected, saved in multiple places. I wasn't planning to go public, but I wasn't planning to bury it either. It wasn't revenge anymore. It was history. That week I visited my mom's new apartment again. She'd started filling it with little things she never used to allow herself to want: sheer curtains, tiny potted succulents, a bright turquoise kettle that whistled loudly when it boiled. "It's ugly," she said with a grin as she poured me tea, "but it makes me laugh." And I realized I'd never seen her decorate for herself before. We spent that evening going through old photo albums. She pulled out one in particular, a trip to Oregon years ago. I must have been 9. My father had taken the photo. We were standing on a cliff by the ocean, the wind blowing our hair back. My mother was laughing. "He used to be gentle," she said, tracing the edge of the photo. "Back then, there was softness." "Do you think it was ever real?" I asked. She looked at me for a long time. "I think some of it was. But sometimes people change so slowly you don't notice they've left until they're already gone." She wasn't bitter. She wasn't nostalgic. She was just honest. I asked her if she wanted the film to be shared more widely, just among family, just so the version of events couldn't be rewritten later by him or by others who'd prefer a cleaner story. She thought about it, then said, "Not now, but maybe one day, when I'm not the only one it could hurt." 2 days later, I got a call from someone I hadn't expected, Lena. She left a voicemail. Her voice was controlled but brittle. "Nathan, I know who you are now, and I know what you did. You could have just talked to me. You didn't have to weaponize everything." There was a pause. "He's a wreck. You've ruined him. Congratulations." She hung up. No request for the video to be taken down. No denial. Just blame. The same pattern. I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. But it made me realize something. Even in collapse, they saw themselves as the wounded party. Even when caught, they still wanted to be seen as victims of exposure, not architects of destruction. That's when I made my final decision. I compiled everything: the audio from Lena, the footage, the voiceovers, even a quiet final scene of my mother watering her balcony plants in the morning light, and burned it to a single flash drive. Then I drove to a lawyer's office. My family had worked with him before, trusted him. I handed him the flash drive and said, "If anything ever happens to me, if there's ever a dispute over the truth, this is the record. I want it stored, protected." He looked at me like I just handed him a nuclear button. "I'm not planning anything," I added, "but history has a way of getting rewritten. I just want to make sure this one doesn't." He nodded, locked it in his vault. That was the last step I needed. Not revenge, not justice, closure. My relationship with Mark began to mend slowly. He sent me a message a few weeks later, a photo of his daughter, painting something wildly abstract on the kitchen floor. She said, "It's Grandma's new sky." I think she's coping better than we are. We met for lunch the following weekend. The conversation was easier than I expected. He told me Dad had tried calling him, but he hadn't picked up. I'm not ready, Mark admitted. You don't have to be, I said. Maybe some doors are better left shut, but we have his blood, Nate, no matter what. Maybe, but we get to decide what we do with it. He looked relieved, like I'd said something he hadn't known how to admit himself. We made a pact, no lies between us, not anymore. If anything cracked, we'd say it out loud, because silence is what destroyed the first half of our lives, and we weren't going to let it destroy the second. A few weeks later, I received a letter in the mail, no return address, but I knew the handwriting, my father. The note was short. I watched it. I wish I hadn't, but maybe that's the point. I hope you never become me. That was it. No signature, no apology, just a bleak acknowledgement. And for the first time, I felt sorry for him, not because I forgave him, but because I understood the finality of his downfall. He hadn't just lost his marriage, he'd lost the illusion of the man he thought he was. Months passed, life moved on. I kept editing freelance projects, short films, documentaries for small nonprofits. Nothing grand but honest work, stories that mattered. My mom joined a local art class. She sent me photos of her watercolors, landscapes mostly, all open skies and distant horizons. Once she painted a lighthouse. When I asked why, she said, because even if no one's listening, it still shines. It was a gray Sunday when I decided to see him. I hadn't planned it. There was no grand speech rehearsed in my head. I just woke up, looked out the window at the clouds hanging low over the city, and knew it was time. My mother didn't ask questions when I told her. She just placed a hand on my arm and said, "Say what you need to say, but remember, he'll only hear what he wants to." I drove to the address I'd heard through Mark, a short-term condo in a sterile, upscale complex with numbered doors and frosted glass balconies. It felt temporary, like everything else in his life now. I stood at his door for a moment, trying to gauge my own heartbeat. There was no anger, just wait. I knocked. He opened it a few seconds later. No surprise on his face. Maybe he'd been expecting this. "Nathan," he said, voice hoarse. "Can I come in?" He stepped aside. The place was quiet, clean but untouched, like a hotel room someone was trying too hard to pretend was a home. There was a single chair by the window, a few books stacked unevenly on the coffee table, and a bottle of wine open on the counter, the same brand I'd seen in that first photo with Lena. He gestured to the couch. I sat. He didn't. For a long while, we just stared at the space between us. He finally spoke. "You came to gloat." "No," I said. "I came to end it." He frowned slightly. End what? This cycle. The silence, the fake smiles, the rewriting. He didn't respond. I looked around the room again. "Is this what you thought freedom would feel like?" That hit something. His jaw tensed, but he said nothing. "You spent years crafting two lives," I continued, "and now here you are alone. No family, no wife, no mistress, just you, and all the things you couldn't say out loud." He sat down finally, but not across from me beside the window facing the city. "I thought I could manage it," he said softly. "I really did. You managed it for years, and it was eating me alive the whole time. Then why keep doing it?" He turned his head slightly, not enough to meet my eyes. "Because I was afraid. Afraid of being invisible. Afraid of the quiet. Your mother stopped needing me. The house didn't need me. Even you and Mark were off doing your own lives, so you needed someone who'd make you feel important again." He didn't answer. I leaned forward. "She believed in you," I said. "Through all of it. She gave you everything, and you gave her an edited version of yourself." Now he looked at me, tired, haunted. "I don't expect forgiveness." "Good," I said, "because I'm not here to give it." His eyes darkened for a moment, but he didn't lash out. I pulled something from my coat pocket, a small USB drive. I placed it gently on the coffee table. "That's the full film," I said. "Unedited, raw footage included, her interview, the motel clips, your emails, my narration, all of it." He looked at it like it might explode. "I gave a copy to a lawyer," I added, "just in case you ever try to rewrite the story again. Just in case you ever decide to paint yourself as a man who was misunderstood. It'll always exist." He nodded slowly. "I don't plan to speak about it again," I said, "but I won't let you forget it." There was silence between us. dense but not hostile, just heavy. Finally, he said something I never expected. I see her now, every time I try to sleep. Good, I said. I stood, walked to the door, paused. Do you ever think, I asked without looking back, that the worst punishment isn't being hated, but being truly seen? He didn't respond. I didn't need him to. I left. And this time I didn't look back. The drive home was quiet. No music, no calls, just me, the road, and a strange sense of stillness. Not peace, not yet, but stillness. Like the last page of a book I didn't want to reread. When I got home, I texted my mom I saw him. It's over. She replied just a few minutes later. Then now we begin again. That night, I opened a new project timeline on my editing software. A black screen, no title, just space. I didn't know what the next story would be, but I knew it would be mine, and it would start with the truth. It's strange how quiet life becomes after the truth explodes. No more secrets, no more whispers, just the echo of what used to be. In the days after that final meeting with my father, I found myself waking up earlier. The weight I didn't realize I was carrying, the suspicion, the tension, the heaviness of pretending it was gone. In its place was something new. Not lightness exactly, but clarity. And clarity has its own kind of peace. I walked to the park more often. I stopped checking my phone every 10 minutes. I began editing a short film for a nonprofit about single mothers re-entering the workforce, the kind of project I would have skipped before because it didn't pay much. But now it felt important, because now I understood what quiet survival looked like, what strength in silence meant. My mother had embodied it for years. Now she didn't have to. She was thriving in ways subtle but deep. She'd started volunteering at a local food co-op, joined a poetry club even though she always claimed she wasn't the creative type. Her hair was shorter now, her wardrobe brighter. And one afternoon, she texted me a selfie of herself on a sunny hiking trail, captioned, "Just me today." Isn't that enough? I stared at that photo for a long time. Yes, it was. Mark and I met weekly now. At first it was for coffee, then it became lunch. Sometimes dinner with his daughters, who clung to me like I was some sort of cool, mysterious uncle, probably because I told stories that always ended with ridiculous twists and animal voices. He told me he decided to start therapy. I don't want to carry his patterns forward, he said. I don't want to become what he became. That struck something in me. We'd spent so long being angry at our father for what he was that we'd never fully examined the parts of ourselves that mirrored him even slightly. I started journaling more, filming less, not because I was afraid, but because I needed space between life and lens. My father had spent years curating a version of himself. I wanted to live mine. A few weeks later, I received an email from an anonymous address. No subject line, just one sentence. You exposed him, but what did you heal? I almost deleted it. But then I didn't, because it was a fair question. Not every truth heals. Some truths simply reveal they clear the path, but they don't walk it for you. And that's when I realized something else, maybe that had been my mistake too. I had believed exposing my father would fix something, would sew the world back together. But truth doesn't fix, it frees. What comes after, that's up to you. I invited my mom over for dinner one Saturday. I cooked badly. She laughed the whole time, watching me burn the garlic. Your father couldn't cook either, she said. He once served me raw chicken and tried to call it medium rare. We both burst out laughing. It was the first time she'd mentioned him casually in weeks. There was no venom, no sorrow, just memory. After dinner, we sat on the balcony watching the city lights flicker on. You know, she said, sipping tea. For years I thought staying quiet was a strong choice. That preserving the family meant protecting the lie. It wasn't your job to carry it alone. I know that now. But back then, I didn't want you boys to lose your father. You didn't fail us, I said softly. She turned toward me, eyes misty. No, she said, but I almost lost myself trying not to let him fall. That line stuck with me, because I had spent so much time watching him fall, documenting it, cutting it together, framing it, that I hadn't paused to see the ways my mother had quietly caught him again and again, at the cost of herself. And still, she wasn't bitter. That kind of grace I don't think I'll ever fully understand, but I'll never forget it. One night, I revisited the final cut of the documentary. It had been weeks since I'd watched it. This time, I let it play in full screen. No skipping, no edits. I watched my father lie. I watched Lena justify. I watched my mother sit in silence folding napkins at a dinner table as her world unraveled behind her back. I watched myself not directly, but through the construction of it all. And for the first time, I saw not just a story of betrayal, I saw a story of transformation. Because what he tried to keep secret, I turned into liberation, not just for me, but for her. At the end of the film, I had added a single line of text, white font, black screen. Some men build empires out of lies, others tear them down with truth. I leaned back, closed my laptop, deleted the project timeline. The film still existed in storage with the lawyer with backups, but I didn't need it open anymore. Its job was done. I received one last letter from my father, no envelope, just a folded sheet left at my door, probably delivered in person. It read, "I watched it again, not because I wanted to, but because I needed to. And I saw the man you see now. I don't like him, but I can't unsee him either. I hope that means something." There was no name at the end, just his handwriting. I didn't respond, because truth is the response. And he'd finally looked at it. You don't realize how much of your life is built on someone else's story, until you finally stop living in it. For most of my 20s, I was unknowingly orbiting around my father's shadow, measuring integrity, by his words defining manhood, by his presence telling myself that silence meant strength, because that's what he showed me. But now, with everything laid bare, I was standing on something I hadn't felt in years, solid ground, and it was mine. I started working on a new film, not a documentary, a fictional short, loosely based on the concept of duality, a man who lives two lives, one in the light and one in the dark, and what happens when those two selves finally collide. It wasn't about my father, not directly, but the themes were undeniably drawn from the wreckage he left behind. Only this time, I wasn't collecting truth. I was creating story, not out of necessity, but choice. That felt like freedom. I met someone around that time. Her name was Elise. She worked at a bookstore. I wandered into one rainy afternoon, one of those quiet, dusty places where the floors creaked and no one rushed you. I wasn't looking for anything that day, but she noticed the book in my hand, a collection of Raymond Carver stories, and struck up a conversation. Funny how something that small can become something so steady. We started talking, then coffee, then walks that turned into dinners, then quiet nights on her balcony where she read aloud, and I listened like the words were holding everything together. She didn't know my story at first, but when she did, she didn't flinch. She asked questions, not the curious kind, the kind that showed she wanted to understand. And when I told her about the video, the confrontation, the fallout, she said something that I think changed everything. You didn't destroy your father. You dismantled the lie he built around himself. There's a difference. That line stayed with me, because for all the blame that had come my way, the quiet judgment from relatives, the phone calls that stopped, the invitations that dried up, none of them ever acknowledged that difference. But she did. She saw it. And maybe more importantly, she saw me. Not as the son of a scandal, not as the guy who blew up his family, but as someone who chose honesty when it cost him. One evening, months later, my mother came to one of my film screenings. It was a community event, small, intimate local artists showcasing work. My short film was last on the lineup. When the lights dimmed and the story played, I glanced at her in the corner of the room. She sat with her hands folded, eyes steady on the screen. She didn't cry. She didn't look away. And when it ended, when the audience clapped gently and turned their heads to find the director, she was the first one standing. Afterward, as people trickled out and offered polite words and handshakes, she pulled me into a hug and whispered, "That was the most beautiful kind of revenge, quiet, true, and full of heart." I didn't say anything back. I just held her, because I knew what she meant, and I knew she meant me. Mark came too with his daughters. They drew pictures of Uncle Nate, the movie star, during the screening and gave them to me after. Stick figures and hearts and oddly shaped cameras. It was the most honest review I'd ever received. He pulled me aside as they ran to the snack table. "You know," he said, "Dad asked me if he should come." I raised an eyebrow. "Seriously?" Mark nodded. I told him not to. "Good." I also told him, "I don't think this was ever about revenge. I think it was about breaking the cycle." He looked at me. "And I think you did." The months blurred in the best possible way. My mother started dating again, slowly, cautiously. The first time she told me, she sounded nervous. "I'm not looking for anything serious," she said. "Just someone who doesn't lie." That sounds pretty serious to me, I replied with a smile. She laughed, and it was the kind of laugh I hadn't heard in years. Not careful, not polite, free. I still think about my father sometimes, not often, but when I do, it's not with rage. It's more like watching a film I used to love, one that doesn't hold up anymore. You remember the feeling, the admiration, the comfort, but now you can't unsee the cracks in the writing, the bad edits, the ending that makes you wince. He hasn't reached out since the final letter, and I haven't needed him to, because what I needed wasn't reconciliation, it was release, and I gave that to myself. One morning, I opened my email and found a message from a stranger, someone who had seen a private link to the film passed along by a mutual friend. They wrote I saw myself in it. The lies I told, the person I hurt, the way I justified everything. Your story made me stop, made me admit it. Thank you. I read it twice, then a third time, and I sat with that message for a long time. Because maybe that's what storytelling is really for. Not for revenge, not for validation, but for recognition. To say you're not alone, to say you can change, to say here's what truth looks like unfiltered and still standing. It's been a year, one full circle around the sun since I pressed play on that video at my parents' anniversary dinner, since the moment I chose truth over tradition, exposure over silence, clarity over comfort. I didn't think about anniversaries much before. I used to see them as sentimental dates, balloons, cards, photo albums, collecting dust. Now, I think of them as markers, not of what stayed, but of what changed, and this year everything did. My mother recently moved again, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. She found a cottage on the edge of town with ivy-covered walls and a garden she says is big enough to feel alive, but small enough to keep. I helped her unpack one weekend. She laughed at the way I folded kitchen towels and told me I'd make a terrible housewife. Then she hugged me, really hugged me, like all the weight had finally left her shoulders. I'm not angry anymore, she said quietly as we watched the sun go down from her porch. I'm not even sad. I looked at her. What are you free? That word again. Not shouted, not claimed, just lived. Mark and I are closer than we've ever been. We talk almost every day, not just about our dad or the past, but about the present, about his kids, about movies, about therapy, about how hard it is to learn vulnerability when you grew up with a man who taught you how to hide your feelings, not honor them. We're breaking patterns together, one conversation at a time. And maybe that's the only way anything really heals, not with one grand gesture, but with 1,000 small, deliberate choices to do better than the ones before us. As for my father, I don't hear from him. Sometimes I wonder if he watches my work, if he searches my name on Vimeo or YouTube and stumbles across one of the new films, if he sits alone in that condo and sees shadows of himself in my characters, the men who smile too wide, speak too softly, hide too well. Maybe he does, maybe he doesn't, but I no longer carry the need for him to see me, because I see myself now. And that's enough. Elise and I are still together, not in the fairy tale way, in the real way. We argue about whether cereal belongs in the fridge, it doesn't. We forget anniversaries, but remember the way each other takes coffee. We've fought about vulnerability, about what silence means, about what honesty really costs, but the difference is we talk. We always talk. I told her once after a long walk through the city I used to believe that love was what survived betrayal. Now I believe love is what never asks you to betray yourself in the first place. She didn't say anything. She just took my hand. That was enough. The film, The Man Who Lives Two Lives, was never published publicly. It lives in a vault in cloud storage on a single hard drive in my desk drawer, but I still screen it occasionally. Private gatherings, quiet rooms, people who need it. And every time I do, someone comes up to me afterward, eyes, glassy voice trembling, and says the same thing in 100 different ways. That was me. That was my father. That was my partner. That was my lie. That was my silence. And I remind them gently that the story is less about betrayal and more about what we do once we see it, because seeing is where healing begins. There's one moment I keep going back to, not the confrontation, not the motel, not the film, a memory. I must have been 10, sitting in the back seat of our car, my dad driving the windows down, my mom humming along to an old jazz track. The sun was golden, spilling through the windshield like syrup. I asked Dad, "Do you ever lie?" He chuckled. About anything? He was quiet for a second, then said, "Lying is easy, but it makes life heavy." That moment, that sentence stuck with me for years. And now it has a new meaning. because I think that's what happened to him. He lied so much for so long he could no longer carry himself. The man who once carried me on his shoulders couldn't carry his own reflection in the mirror anymore. That's not vengeance. That's just gravity. I used to think the punishment would be shame, that he'd watch the video and collapse in regret, that he'd beg, that he'd hurt the way we hurt. But the real punishment was facing the full weight of the life he'd built on sand, and knowing it had crumbled not because someone destroyed it, but because he never built it to last. My mom tells me I walk differently now, straighter, lighter. She says I carry peace in my chest where bitterness used to live. I don't know if that's true, but I know this: I no longer wake up dreading the lie. I wake up writing something new, something honest, something whole. There's a final shot in a film I haven't made yet. A man older now walks alone down a path lined with trees. The sun is setting warm and forgiving. He's not being chased. He's not chasing anything. He just walks. He breathes. And for the first time, he's not afraid of being seen. That's the story I want to tell next. That's the ending I want to live into. If you've made it to the end of this story, thank you. I hope it made you think about truth not as a weapon, but as a compass. If you've ever faced betrayal, if you've ever carried a silence that wasn't yours, if you've ever burned a bridge and still found the light on the other side, you're not alone. The story is for you. And if you've got a story of your own, share it in the comments below. Or just tell us what would you have done, because someone out there might need to hear it. And sometimes truth is the only thing that sets the next story free.